Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook on this Friday, January 31st. I am Marc-Antoine Godin, alongside my good friend Arpin Basu. Arpin, big news in the NHL. What?
It's funny. Whenever you say that, I always expect you to say the athletic support.
Yeah, I know.
And then I know. And then every time you say Basu, I go, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That was 2 years. That was more than 2 years ago. Or 3 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Yeah, for those who are not familiar, we had a podcast for 6 years with The Athletic that was called The Athletic Support. It used to be a bilingual show, so we had one episode in French, one in English, and we would alternate. And then it became the Basu and Godin Notebook last year. So that's our little backstory.
Yeah.
And Arpin, back when we were doing The Athletic Support, the NHL salary cap was flat. The number was not going up, and it's going to increase a great deal in the next 3 years. So this is definitely a topic that we'll have to tackle in today's show because it will impact the Canadiens, obviously.
Well, it'll impact the entire league, but we will talk about how it will impact the Canadiens specifically. Just for those who haven't heard, maybe on Friday, the league announced that the salary cap will be set at $95.5 million next year, up from $88 million this year, $104 million the year after, and $113.5 million in 2027-28. So pretty significant. We're going to dive into this and what it means for the Canadiens a little later in the show. So stick around for that if you're interested.
But before, I need to talk to you about not O.J. Simpson, but the juice. or lack thereof.
A lack of juice, yeah. That's good stuff.
That was the new term yesterday after the game. There are two things that seem to be colliding. First, the Canadiens having been caught up by their heavy schedule, and maybe they're banged up. Maybe they ended up being tired or whatever. I don't know. But they knew that there was an opening, there was a window in their schedule to try to adjust some things through practice. So they got back to work. They were on the ice for 4 days in a row. And the result, according to Martin St. Louis, is that they did not have enough juice in their game against the Minnesota Wild. So what is it exactly? Because they're not, last time I checked, they're not the team that was playing a back-to-back.
No. They're not, and they've actually performed rather poorly in this situation this season. That's actually the last time this year that the Canadiens will be rested facing a team on a back-to-back. They've done it 8 times this year. They've only won 3 of those 8 games. So that's a bit of a trend, but that obviously goes. That's since the beginning of the season, and I don't think the team the Canadiens were in November is the same team the Canadiens are now. So it's a little less applicable, but we did have instances of it more recently. But last night, what Minnesota did to Montreal looks very similar. I watched the game they played in Toronto. They did the same thing to the Maple Leafs. The Maple Leafs could not get a whole lot going. They also looked like a team that was lacking juice. And to be fair to Montreal, the last time this happened was against Tampa on January 21st, and they won that game. But they lost. They've lost 5 of 8 times that they've had the rest advantage. I found it somewhat alarming, but also somewhat admirable that Marty St. Louis would be willing to come out. He referenced juice 5-6 times in his press conference. Like, he really decided that this was the reason. And so, when I asked him, what you just said, you were the team that was rested. You were the team that was not on a back-to-back. You were the team that didn't travel last night. how is it that you're the team that's lacking juice? And you got really defensive about it. I don't know. We've been on the ice. We're trying to do the right things. We needed to fix things. We've been better defensively the last couple of games, but we wind up with no juice. And so that's an issue.
Yeah.
You're one of the youngest teams in the league. Maybe that hurts you in this situation. Maybe experience helps in managing energy and making sure you have that juice. But you would think that the younger team would have less of an issue with that. I could be wrong. But, overall, that is what it was. And I found it kind of a bit of a lame excuse when you're facing a team on a back-to-back, a quality team. Minnesota's road record is now 25-3 this season. So it's that's a good team. And obviously they got lots of juice from the whole Marc-Andre Fleury story and everything. They obviously want to win for him. And so that's natural. But overall, Marty said on Wednesday after practice, this is a race to the break. This is a chase to the break. They're banged up. Obviously, they lost Kaiden Guhle. We'll touch on that in a bit. But Emil Heineman's departure has been more impactful than anyone could have anticipated, and we've discussed that already on the podcast. But it's more and more true with every passing game, and conceivably could be a factor in the lack of juice because the balance in the deployment of his forward lines has been pretty severely impacted by Heineman's departure. And so maybe that is an explanation. Emil Heineman, who, by the way, was not on the plane with the Canadiens heading to California on Friday, so presumably won't be back over the next 3 games. Maybe Super Bowl weekend. We'll see.
And it was worth, paying attention to that since the Canadiens returned Raphaël Harvey-Pinard to Laval on Friday morning.
Right. So, but yeah, point being is that they've lost 4 games in a row, right? This is the first time they've lost 4 games. One of them was in overtime, but still, they've lost 4 games in a row. They haven't lost 4 games in a row since the famous loss in Toronto that kind of kicked off their run to this stage. The loss that dropped them to last overall in the NHL. So this is definitely, and we all saw something like this coming at some point. The Canadiens were not going to continue playing at the pace that they were playing at. But man, to explain it away like that just seemed somewhat alarming. Like, you don't want to be an alarmist, but
what with the lack of juice thing?
Alarming. The lack of juice thing. Yeah.
Well, when you referenced the fact that Marty talked about, a race to the break. This is an expression or an image that he's used in the previous 2 seasons, just as a way to approach the end of the season mentally. You've got like 6, 7, 8
sprint through the finish line.
Sprint to the finish line. That's it.
Yeah.
So it's just an approach to because you don't have necessarily a real sense of purpose in your games, at least, attack it the right way. And this time, so there was it was echoing that a bit, but at the same time, it also to me signals the fact that those guys are looking forward to the break. And if they do, it's because they're tired and they're banged up. If you have a team that's, going full throttle the way they were, let's say 2.5 weeks ago, you look at a break and you say, gosh, it's almost too bad that they would stop, and there's a chance that it might break their rhythm. There will be a team somewhere in the NHL for whom the narrative will be, this comes at a bad time because we had momentum and we wished we could continue playing. Somebody will say that. So for the Canadiens to say, it's a race to the break, I think that it puts a target. It's like, guys, hang on for just a little bit longer, bite the bullet, and you're going to get your vacation. To me, it's really a spirit that tells a lot about how tired they are. So after that, to come up and say we did not have enough juice, it's not entirely surprising to me. What's more worrisome is what exactly can they do to fix that. They're heading for a California trip where they're going to play 3 games in 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to get easier on that on that front. So
then they have a back-to-back at home. Like that's their chase to the break.
Super Bowl weekend. So
yeah,
it might very well be a very difficult week for the Canadiens, and it's great that when you look at the standings, despite not winning in their last 4, they're still maintaining themselves. They're still in the mix. 4 points behind the Columbus Blue Jackets, who currently hold the last wild card spot.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing wrong, and all those teams have had bumps on the road at some point. So I don't know. And the other thing you say, it shouldn't happen because they're one of the youngest teams. They're one of the youngest teams. You could look at it and say, yeah, statistically they are. But what really, I think that in a situation like this, a team that's slightly more experienced, that's slightly older on average, it might not necessarily weigh more in their legs, but it will make a positive difference in their approach to rest, in the way that they've been able to handle situations like these and how they've learned over the years. So an experienced team, to a certain extent, might be better prepared for that sort of dog days in the schedule. So it's not necessarily an advantage to be on the young side in a case like that.
Yeah, that's why I acknowledge that, and that maybe it is in fact a disadvantage. But I just find the whole thing contradictory to the mantra that Marty always repeats, that the league doesn't care. The league doesn't care, and every team is going through a similarly compressed schedule, and every team has injuries. The Minnesota Wild are missing a legitimate Hart Trophy candidate in Kirill Kaprizov. Every team has injuries, and the Canadiens are fragile in the sense that they can't accommodate injuries as well as other teams can. The fact that Emil Heineman, I kind of pointed this out, the Jets are missing Adam Lowry on Tuesday, their captain, and their kind of heart and soul leader and a very important player for them. They're able to compensate for his absence. They don't miss a beat because they can, because they're a better team. Minnesota can compensate for Kaprizov because they're a better team. The Canadiens lose Heineman and their identity kind of went with it. It's really this inability to roll 4 lines as regularly as they did when they had such confidence in that Evans Armia Heineman line, kind of derailed them a little bit. And obviously the Guhle injury doesn't help. So, but it's contradictory to the league doesn't care thing. And it's contradictory to this, like, if you're going to place an emphasis on let's sprint to that break, let's get to that break and reset and figure out how we're going to attack the schedule after the 4 nations, you can't lack juice in the very next game. Like the day after saying that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You can't come out and say we lack juice, then your message didn't get through, it really just doesn't. And it's not as if, listen, it's not as if players go into a game and they're like, oh man, I'm tired, I'm just going to go half speed. This is something that unconsciously happens, right? The intent was not for the Canadiens to go out and not hustle, right? Or not have their legs and not forecheck as well as they had and not track back as well as they had. Like all the things that require that extra 2% of energy, they didn't have. And sometimes you can't control that. And Marty, he seemed to suggest, at least, and I don't think anyone else was suggesting this, like they had to practice at some point. He seemed to suggest that maybe practicing both days was a mistake, and so I don't agree with that personally.
Well, it's more like damn if you do, that damn if you don't.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no good solution to that. It was needed. They hadn't practiced. They barely practiced in January. Like, you got to practice at some point. So I don't understand. Like, I don't know what as a coach, I don't know what you're supposed to do in that situation. And good on him. He came out and called it like he saw it. He said we didn't have our top gear as the explanation for the word juice. It's just that as a group, the Canadiens are going to have to dig deep here. Like if they want to be what they hope to be, you can't lack juice. That you can lose games. Obviously, you could just get beat by other teams, but you shouldn't beat yourselves, and you shouldn't lose based on a lack of juice. Not at this point in the season. And really, the slim hopes they have of making the playoffs, because let's be honest, they're going to have to play to a pretty high standard to beat all these teams that are in this race. I mean, you mentioned them being 4 points back of the Columbus Blue Jackets. The problem is there are 3 teams between them and the Blue Jackets. And the Rangers are 1 point behind them, and the Flyers are 1 point behind them, and Pittsburgh's 3 points behind them. So it's
the mighty Flyers.
The mighty Flyers, man. They're still
Andrei
there.
Kuzmenko and
Andrei Kuzmenko. Yeah, they got a second rounder out of that. And Kuzmenko played with Michkov. Michkov was benched in the third period recently. So, I mean, I don't know. Yeah. There's other things going on there. And I think Morgan Frost, the marriage between Morgan Frost and John Tortorella was not going to last. That was getting pretty clear. So, Farabee as well. But anyhow, all that to say, the Canadiens are not out of it. It's not the end of the world. They were going to have a slump of some sort, and we mentioned, are they going to have this lull, or is it going to be a slump? Well,
it is a slump.
I think they're in a slump. Yeah, they're slumping right now. So this California trip has grown in importance because of this slump. And so now let's see. Like, one thing about this team is generally this season, when they've been challenged, when they've been counted out, when they've been left for dead, they have proven people wrong. So they have another opportunity to do that starting Sunday, I guess, in Anaheim.
So Martin St. Louis also said this week, I feel as though teams have been taking us more seriously. That's something else also to consider, because when you look at the way that the Minnesota Wild has been able to contain their offense, stop their transition game, stop them from placing pucks deep and enabling the Canadiens to establish, their offense, starting their offense the way that Marty likes to say, in not exactly the same way, but in a way that was not so different than the way the Jets did that before, and Detroit did that, and the Tampa Bay Lightning too. Maybe that there's the Canadiens, offensive system and the way that they've been successful. Now it's been scouted properly. There are new ways to adjust to that, and it'll be up to Martin St. Louis and his assistants to come up with new ways to counter that. It's always a cat and mouse game, but I feel as though lately the recipe that the Canadiens had has stopped working. And you could. Of course, again, we're going to talk about the loss of Guhle and its impact defensively, but I feel like offensively, their teams have done a much better job at containing the Canadiens' offense lately.
Well, I think the big part of that is just taking care of the puck coming out of your zone. If you're coming out of your zone against the Canadiens, if you turn it over, that's what feeds their offense, and that's a lot of their offense is based on that, turning pucks over, counterattacking. Which has led to this turnaround to begin with. Again, another thing that Marty was saying over and over again: trust the forecheck. Like that really is the basis of what the turnaround was founded on. Was really this willingness to get pucks deep, put it behind their D, and go to work forechecking, and eventually forcing mistakes and turning those mistakes into offensive opportunities and ultimately goals. And so I think the Wild did a good job of not feeding that, and Detroit did as well. It's really a point of emphasis against these guys now that you cannot be careless with the puck, and which was what Montreal was being at the beginning of the season. They were being careless with the puck, and that's the whole mantra of actions that help the other team is that. And so I think. The Canadiens still need to learn how to turn offensive zone time into offense. And that's another thing Marty was talking about not so long ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. They got better at that. That's waning right now. Because I think he's right. Defensively, the last couple of games, I think they were pretty good. And, that was a game, they were in that game for a long time. And that game really turned when Marc-Andre Fleury went all retro and did a 2-pad stack on Josh Anderson. And then the Wild come down the ice and Alex Newhook turns it over in his zone, and it's a turnover, and it's a shot from the slot, and they score, and that's it. It's 3-0, and that's it. That's lights out, So, but everything's tied together, and maybe now is an appropriate time to talk about Guhle, because I think his loss, while it is largely a defensive role that he had and a defensive strength that he brings, killing plays in the defensive zone is intricately tied to creating offense, right? If you spend too much time in your zone, you're not going to have the energy to go play offense. So limiting your time in your zone leads to better offense. Making a good first pass like Guhle does on a very consistent basis leads to time in the offensive zone. So Guhle's loss is obviously an important factor here in terms of how the Canadiens are going to get by. One thing I do want to mention, so Nick Suzuki last night in the room, I don't know how much this got out, but he was asked, have you talked to Guhle and everything, and how's he doing? And he said he's in pretty good spirits, all things considered. I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he said, obviously that's a big loss, but hopefully we can get him back soon. I don't know exactly when, but hopefully we can get him back. Yeah. So he didn't sound to me like a guy who's been told that Guhle's going to be gone for the season. So there's that. I think a lot of people, but a lot of people are speculating or assuming that he is out for the season. So that was interesting to me.
There's a lot of Dr. Googles out there, huh? So
that's it.
So I think that a lot will depend on the, how deep was that laceration. How and how it affects the flexion or the flexibility of the knee.
I would imagine the leg's been immobilized right now, but
yeah. So the Canadiens have they said that he would be out indefinitely. If they knew for sure that what happened to him meant the end of the season, there would be no reason. No, they would have said he's out for the year.
Yeah.
So
100%.
So saying he's out indefinitely, it's in all likelihood because they consider that there is a possibility that he might come back. So
sometimes indefinitely means what it means. Sometimes it definitely means that. It means for an indefinite amount of time, like we don't know. And it's not as bad as I think people hear indefinitely and naturally assume the worst. And oftentimes it is the worst. But sometimes it's not. So let's see. I don't know. Nick Suzuki was not talking like a guy who had played his last game with Kaiden Guhle. Didn't come across that way. So
no.
Let's see.
But in the meantime, though, it's it stretches your defense pretty thin. You were mentioning how the loss of Heineman up front exposed their depth. We realize that the Canadiens right now are really a 12 forward team in terms of depth, and on defense, I mean, it stops at 7 guys. They could not afford to lose a lot more because they're bringing Struble in. That's fine. He's a third pairing defenseman, but it's going to be a great challenge for Arbor Jackeye to take some of those minutes. Not only on the PK, but also probably as the most regular partner to Lane Hutson, at least for the time being. I thought that, he misread on, was it a second goal?
Marco Rossi, second goal, yeah. That was a poor read, yes. 100%.
Poor read because he went, it was 2-on-1 and he went with a puck carrier and obviously let the pass go by.
The worst part about it is that he did a shoulder check before going to that guy.
Yeah.
He actually looked and I guess just didn't see Rossi, but
we probably thought that there would be also one of his teammates that would back
he had some help. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there was a first mistake before that at the offensive blue line with Hudson, but My point is, apart from that, I liked what I saw from Xhekaj I pointed it out to you from a feet standpoint. His mobility, I thought he used it well defensively. He killed some plays early on in the game. I thought that he was really involved and eager to show that he can do that sort of job. It was not consistent. He made some mistakes, but I think that if you look at the big picture, this is a guy who's got an opportunity here to increase his value. And before tonight, I think before last night, I think 7 of the 8 games that he had played the most this season, the Canadiens had won them. So it's not a situation where he would be sent in garbage time as a third pairing defenseman. We're getting our ass kicked, so let's play our role players because it's out of reach.
Right.
Not at all. So the times that he hit 20 minutes or 19 were games that the Canadiens actually won. So I think that it's in itself, a little encouraging sign, and it's also an opportunity for Jayden Struble to maybe find his rhythm and start playing without the stress of thinking, well, at my first blunder, I'll be out of the lineup, because right now there's nobody knocking at the door to replace him right away.
No, and Struble has to go through very much the same thing that Xhekaj went through. And so he can look at him as an example. I think that a lot of the issues that were plaguing Xhekaj's game earlier in the season, getting beat one-on-one defensively, not winning enough battles, not killing plays quickly enough, those are some of the things that were plaguing Struble before Alexandre Carrier showed up and basically took his spot in the lineup. I remember talking to Struble at the time, or the very next day, actually, like right after the trade, and he was a little perplexed and confused as to why he had been on the outs, in terms of his spot in the lineup. Like, Barron had kind of replaced him in a way in that sense. So he didn't really get it. Like, he honestly sincerely believed he was playing pretty well and did not understand why he had fallen out of favor and lost the confidence of Marty and the coaching staff. And I asked him the same question, or I reminded him of that conversation yesterday before the game. And he was like, yeah, I did think about it. I went back and I looked at some of my games, and I can recognize now that I was losing battles. I was losing one-on-one. Like, a lot of the things that were plaguing Xhekaj, he mentioned as being problems in his own game. So when you look at the progress that Xhekaj has made, and Marty, you remember a time this season when everyone was like, oh, Marty hates Xhekaj, they're going to trade him, and it's not compatible.
Very early on. Early in the season.
This was a thing, So Wednesday, Marty was asked about Xhekaj. It was a definite thing. People were talking that way.
I know.
And Wednesday, Marty talking about Xhekaj, like just how proud he is of his progression. I asked him about how he's handling sort of the enforcer role, because he's matured in that sense, and Marty was quite complimentary in that sense as well. Like, he's playing his game without hurting us, was basically what he said. He's not taking dumb penalties, he's not putting them in bad situations, and he's still doing the job. I think refusing that fight with Reeves against the Leafs was a good example of that. So, Xhekaj's earned this promotion. Now, can he handle it? That's what's going to be interesting to find out, And Struble, this is kind of the silver lining here. Like, you don't want to lose Guhle, and the Canadiens have aspirations here where losing Guhle really hurts. But from an organizational standpoint, what have we been saying all year? Like, what is the goal for this administration this year?
Take on information.
Be in the mix, but to get information, exactly. So they're going to get some. They're going to know what they have. Listen, Arber Xhekaj needs a contract at the end of the year. This is a perfect opportunity to see what this guy has in him. Is he ready for something like this? Struble, they're going to need to make a decision on him at some point. They want to know what they have in him. This is an opportunity to do so. And if Struble can't handle it, they could go on further fact-finding missions. They could bring up Adam Engstrom, see what he has in his belly, or bring up Logan Mayu,
William Trudeau,
or William Trudeau, or there's any number of guys that they could give give an opportunity or a chance and see what they do with it. So, but yeah, the Guhle thing's obviously far from ideal. He's been, since Carrier arrived. And when they were playing together, like that's some of the best hockey we've seen Guhle play. This is a team that can ill afford to lose a guy like that, so it could derail everything the Canadiens are trying to do. But again, it's a test, and I feel like the Canadiens have demonstrated up to this point that they're up for tests, and they kind of rise to it. So. Let's see what happens in California. This is a pretty consequential trip in the context of their season. But they need to turn things around a little bit here.
On Friday, the New York Islanders, who have won 6 games in a row, you know how every team in that wild card, they make their run at some point.
Yeah.
And now it's the Islanders' turn. They're back. They're in the thick of it. And they claimed defenseman Adam Boqvist on waivers. Boqvist,
right after trading for Scott Perunovich.
Yeah.
That's 2 undersized defensemen that they added in just this week.
That's true. Yeah. They didn't pay much for Perunovich.
No, 5th round pick.
So
I hope
obviously Boqvist is, I mean, depending on where you look, he's listed either at 5'11" or 6 feet tall. I suspect that it was a tad too small for the Canadiens' tastes, but considering he's a right-handed shot and he doesn't earn a lot of money and he's going to be an RFA at the end of the year, the Canadiens chose to pass on him because the Islanders are just above them in the standings, so the Canadiens had priority. Had you been in Kent Hughes' shoes or Jeff Gordon's shoes, is it a guy that you would have put a claim on?
I thought they might. It would have been an interesting gamble, and really not even a gamble, really just a try. I mean, they really didn't. They could have just put him back on waivers if it didn't work out. So yeah, I find it. I'm mildly surprised. Thought they would give it a go. But
because let's face it, the guys we named, either it's Mayu who's not having a great season in Laval, Engstrom or Trudeau. If those guys are the next man up, and
it's not ideal.
Break it. It shows that you're right now. Your depth is it's 7 deep on defense. It's finishes with Struble. So at some point, whether it's in the trade through waivers or whatever. But Boqvist is righty, so that I think made it interesting. But adding an extra body there would not have gone astray, I think.
No, and honestly, this kind of reminded me when he was put on waivers. You remember when the Canadiens lost Gustav Lindstrom on waivers?
Yeah,
they could call up Gustav Lindstrom. He'd be another option.
No. He's on the AHL deal.
Oh, that's right. He's on the AHL deal. That's right. Well, they put Gustav Lindstrom on waivers the day after the Ducks traded Jamie Drysdale to Philly, and sure enough, the Ducks picked him up, and that seemed like a handshake agreement that we'll do this for you for whatever reason. I can't really even think of why they would do that, but so yeah, when Boqvist went on waivers, I was like, oh, is this kind of a similar thing? Is this what's going on here? And then, so I was kind of half expecting the Canadiens to pick him up, but they didn't. And it's not the end of the world, but they must have their reasons. But it's not as if he's a real difference maker. The Islanders have some pretty serious injury issues on defense as well, which is, I think, the impetus for Perunovich as well. But yeah, I was half expecting it and was somewhat surprised when I saw the Islanders claimed him.
Yeah. Ready for some salary cap talk? Because it's big news. So I think,
yeah,
absolutely. So you laid it out at the top of the show. Basically, it comes up to roughly a 25% increase of the cap within 3 years. The great novelty is that they're projecting. These are projections; they're not firm numbers, but they're solid enough projections that those are the numbers that the PA and the league will work with. And so to have them in 3 years in advance, it opens all sorts of possibilities for the teams to plan in advance, structure the new deals that they're going to sign accordingly. But I think that overall it puts the Canadiens in a very interesting spot. There are pros and cons. I guess on the one hand, you might see the haves and the have-nots, the teams that are willing to spend to the cap, and other teams that will say, "Whoa, wait a minute!" To us, spending to up to 113 million in 2 years, it's too much for our own good. So we're going to have an internal budget. So the minute that you have teams that have an internal budget and others that are comfortable spending to the cap, well, it puts the Canadiens, obviously being in the latter group, in a position where they can flex their financial might and their financial muscle, and that's to me that's very interesting. So it's the higher the cap, considering the Canadiens have been, a cash cow. That's the term for the league.
That is a term, yes.
So, I mean, it's about time that the big markets who provide a lot of money to this league have some sort of benefit for what they give everybody.
Yes and no. I mean, the whole purpose of the salary cap system is so that they don't have that benefit. That's really the reason why we lost an entire season of hockey, was to make it so that the low revenue teams could compete with the high revenue teams, which was not the case prior to that lockout. And so you think back to some of the teams the Red Wings put together. Obviously, the Rangers spent like crazy under Glenn Sather. Didn't really get the Rangers anywhere, but the Red Wings won a couple of cups, spending big on veteran Hall of Fame free agents. So we might be getting to a situation like that. But for the Canadiens' perspective, we have often mentioned the summer of 2026 as being a turning point year, potentially, for this team to kind of emerge as a contender at that time. This gives us a framework under which to look at the 2026-27 season. So very quickly, the Canadiens have the Canadiens have 6 forwards under contract in 2026-27. Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Juraj Slafkovsky. So the entire first line under contract, all under $8 million. Brendan Gallagher and Josh Anderson will be in the final year of their contract that year, assuming they're still on the team. Alex Newhook will be in the final year of his contract. And Kirby Dach's a big question mark. He will be an RFA with arbitration rights that year, UFA the year after. So he will either play himself into a huge contract or not, or might just play himself off the team by then. On defense, Mike Matheson's contract will be expired. Only Alexandre Carrier and Kaiden Guhle are currently under contract. We can safely assume Wayne Hudson will probably be on a pretty rich deal by that point. That'll be his first year of RFA. That'll be the end of his entry-level contract in 2026. And Arbor Xhekaj, as I mentioned before, is up for RFA and has ARB rights this summer. So I think we can presume that both those guys will be around. Now, in addition to that, and not to get overly deep into this, but you have Emil Heineman, who will be an RFA this summer. I'm presuming he'll be signed through that season. And then you could have 5, if not 6 guys on entry-level contracts on the roster that year. Owen Beck, pretty safe to assume he'll be on the team by then. Ivan Demidov, of course, will be only in the second year of his DLC that year.
You're talking about 26, 27?
26, 27, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So you'll have Beck, Demidov, perhaps Oliver Kapanen, David Reinbacher on defense will be on his DLC. Adam Engstrom, if he's in the mix on defense, will be in the final year of his ELC. And so that's pretty interesting in the sense that if you consider yourself a contending team, if you have five, anywhere between 4 and 6 guys like Florian Jacki, maybe if he's a fourth liner by then, would be on the last year of his entry level contract.
Or Michael Hage.
Michael Hage would be on an entry level contract, exactly. So that's a lot of guys with very, very efficient contracts at that point, assuming that they're contributing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts here, but basically it'll also be Sam Montembeault's final year of his contract. Jakub Dobeš needs a contract this summer. Jacob Fowler is going to be in the mix by then. Who knows how that goaltending situation will play out, but it'll be a cheap position for the Canadiens. I don't think Dobeš is going to strike it rich this summer, no matter what happens the rest of the year. And Fowler would be on his entry level contract by then as well. So I kind of made some assumptions that might seem ridiculous right now, but again, remember, we're talking, and I didn't even include Jake Evans or any of the unrestricted free agents. So in this outlook, Mike Matheson's gone, Dvorak obviously is gone, Armia is gone, Evans is gone, Petetta's gone, Savard obviously is gone. So and some of those guys might be back, but if you look at a scenario where you have, the 5 entry level contracts, let's say Hudson's making $9 million that year, just for argument's sake. Let's say Doc has played himself into a contract, is making $8 million that year. Yeah. I gave Heineman 1.5. I put Tuck and Roy on the team at 1, Mailloux at $2 million, let's say. Anyhow, all of this is very rough, but if that were to play out, the Canadiens would have somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million in cap space in the summer of 2026. If they brought back Patrick Laine, who would be a UFA that year, and gave him, say, $8 million, which would be a pay cut from his current 8.7, then you're looking at $12 million in cap space. The most interesting, which is obviously a very favorable situation, and remember, like, the Carey Price contract is off the books, like a lot of cap things sort of get settled that year. The most interesting part of that is the fact that the Caulfield, Suzuki, and Slafkovsky contracts combined are worth $23.325 million. In 26-27, that will represent 22.4% of the salary cap, which is a phenomenal number to have one of your top 2 lines under contract for. This year, just to put that in perspective, this year, Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and William Nylander take up 40.8% of the lease cap.
Yeah.
Matthews and Nylander alone take up 28%, just over 28% of their cap. McDavid and Draisaitl this year take up 23.8 of the Oilers cap. Next year, with Draisaitl's pay bump, they'll take up 27.7. So you have an entire forward line that by 26-27 will be in their prime and taking up 22.4% of the cap. That is a great starting point. That, combined with the entry-level contracts the Canadiens will likely have on the books that year, puts you in an excellent position to strike and add significant talent. Not to mention the fact that they're going to have, this is the year where their overflow of prospects will really start to become almost a problem, like in the sense that they're going to have so many guys with a finite amount of space. Like you mentioned Michael Hage earlier, I didn't even include him here because if you just look at the guys up front, I mean, if you assume that Anderson and Gallagher will be here for the life of their contract, so they'll still be on the team and they're still going to play. You have Caulfield, Suzuki, Slafkovsky, Anderson, Gallagher, Newhook. That's 6 forwards already. If Doc is back, that's 7. Heineman makes 8. Beck and Demidov gets you to 10. And you got 2 more spots. Hage presumably would be one of them, but you have Joshua Roy in the mix. You have Oliver Kapanen. You have Philip Machar. You have all these guys that you're not going to be able to incorporate into your lineup that you could use as trade currency. And so you have a combination of an efficient contract, an efficient line of forwards, all these entry level contracts and all these prospects that you don't have room for, and a rising cap that gives you anywhere between $12 and $20 million of space that summer, you come to kind of a perfect storm where the Canadiens can really strike and do something that's almost too wild to predict at this point. But it really positions them well. And the fact that that's the year that they break the $100 million barrier, being the same year that Carey Price's contract comes off the books, like that's, you're adding to the bump. So the bump that year is what? You go from 95.5 to 104 million. So that's 8.5 million that you're adding year over year. But then the Canadiens get to add 10.3 million to that, basically getting $18 million in cap space for free.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting. Like, this is kind of sort of back of the napkin look at everything, but a lot of their cap inefficiencies will be gone. A lot of their inefficient contracts will be either gone or on the verge of being gone. And they'll have some of their best players under very team friendly contracts at that point.
Absolutely, yeah. So, okay, different observations on that. First, obviously, it pays off to have your house in order. The Canadiens are relatively sane when it comes to the way that they've distributed their money so far. So, with a higher cap, it puts them in a good position. Probably not as good as if rival teams that have committed a lot of money might have been a bit stuck if the cap was not going up as much. Everybody's going to get that extra, the margin of maneuver to maybe either to give themselves some breathing room if they're tight against the cap, or to play and spend some more. So it might not maximize what being sane financially could have been, but there's no doubt that for them it enables them to do a few things, and that's not necessarily in 2 years, but starting off even next year. One of them is that they can choose to spend money and give generous contracts and be willing to pay probably a bit more money, and in return, making sure that those contracts are tradables. Basically, in other words, you're willing to pay a bit more money and offer less trade protection or less movement clause. In that sense, so that you've got the flexibility to give up a lot of money to a player, but if one day you want to get out of that deal, you want to be able to move him. So, and in that sense, the dollar figure it can be hampering for some teams, but if you've given no trade clauses left and right, you're handcuffing yourself. So that's, I think, one aspect where the team is going to be willing to say, we're going to make sure that we keep our people happy or attract free agents and make them happy with a good dollar amount. But if we can keep our flexibility to move contracts that one day we might be bothered with, they're going to look at that. The other thing is that when you look, you mentioned how the top line only takes 22% of the cap. That's great. And who knows how Slav's deal is going to age and Kaiden Guhle's deal is going to age. Those two primarily. There's a level of hope and trust that those two guys will be developing to the players that the Canadiens think they can be, and that they're going to be healthy for the duration of their contract. But a side benefit is that when you have the cap going up like this, they will be paid for a long time at an amount where it's going to be easily absorbed within their cap because the cap will be so much greater. So the percentage of their cap going down, and if let's say Slav doesn't become a bona fide first line winger, and he's paid the money that he's going to be paid. It's easier to deal with that when you have
all three of those guys are paid as second line forwards in this cap environment.
Yeah,
that's the reality. Everyone got huge sticker shock when they saw Leon Draisaitl's $14 million deal. The Colorado Avalanche got sticker shock because they thought that Mikko Rantanen was going to ask for that $14 million deal. Well, yeah, they will. Like, the entire way that we view contracts is going to change drastically. Like, it's monumental, this shift. So let's say, with all that kind of very rudimentary calculations that we just went over, that the Canadiens do find themselves with $20 million in cap space. You got to that's all relative, right? Like, $20 million is a lot. But if you're looking to add a top line forward, perhaps 15 of that will be tied up in that player's contract. Like, it's player contracts are going to a place that everyone's going to get sticker shock. And, obviously this is a very minor consideration league wide, because, Mitch Marner's looking at what just happened, and obviously Rantanen is looking at what just happened, and they're like, well, cha-ching. Like, this is,
and down the road, Kaprizov too.
Kaprizov as well, right? And so, but even minor guys like Jake Evans, and when we were talking about Jake Evans' next contract, this is what I was talking about. Like, his contract is in this context, and this is what. When Slafkovsky agreed to that contract, yes, the Canadiens made a commitment to him before he had fully proven himself, and he traded in that security. But by over the very early in this contract, which hasn't even kicked in yet, Slafkovsky's going to have a second line forward salary. And so if he performs at a second line forward level, while that would be disappointing for a number one overall pick, he will be paid that way. And so the bar is not all that high to get all the value that you hope to get out of his contract, out of Caulfield's contract, even out of Suzuki's contract. But where it gets tricky, and where the Canadiens can't just look at $20 million in cap space and start going nuts, is the Hudson contract, right? And so that's just as an example. Like, what would Demidov's contract coming out of entry level look like, assuming he performs the way everyone assumes he will? Mm-hmm. That would come up in 2028, 29, when the cap could conceivably be upwards of $116, $117 million. And so what percentage of that cap would he be worth if he's like a 40 goal scorer at that point? So on the one hand, there is that opportunity in 2026. And I think the Canadiens have always kind of looked at that year as the year that they're out from under the Carey Price contract, and a year away from being out from under the Gallagher and Anderson contracts, as their first real opportunity to start doing some impactful things. But their own guys, like the Hudson contract negotiation, should it begin this summer, will be fascinating, because this news just changed all the math for what his contract might look like.
I'm sure that the Canadiens would want to sign him as soon as possible. And
I'm sure they would too. I'm sure they would have preferred that this press release would not be announced before doing so. It's
there's not. I mean, they still even. They're not allowed to sign him anyway before July 1st. So
July 1st, yeah, they can't sign him.
So they need that announcement would have happened way before that. Nonetheless, those projections for next year. So they'll bring the argument of security to him. Mm-hmm. He's a smaller defenseman. This is a team that's able to use him in his strengths, and maybe that they would say, hey, there's not a ton of teams out there that would believe in you as much as we do, and so let's marry.
Yeah.
let's get married. So yeah, I'm sure that there's going to be a point in that sense. Some pressure put there. But just a quick side note: you mentioned percentage of the cap, talking about different negotiations. I had a conversation with an executive who brought this point to me and said that really it's the agents that have made this into a talking point, but that the general managers who are the best negotiators,
Mm-hmm.
they still refuse to play that game of the percentage of the cap. Like
Right.
wanting to be compared to the best players based on their percentage, it can be fallacious because anyone who wants to be paid the same percentage as a star player, but in the context of a higher cap, basically what's going to happen is, guys, he's going to deprive his team of resources compared to the team that's got the established star. Like, for example, somebody says, I'm as good as Alexander Barkov, who's making $10 million a year, and his contract it's 11. At the time that it was signed, it was 11.4% of the cap. Mm-hmm. So under the new salary cap, let's say 2 years from now, when it's at 104 millions. So the player comes at the negotiating table and says, I am worth 11.4% of 104 million. So that would be north of $11.5 million per year. But the team who's got that player will say, hold on, you say you're as good as Alexander Barkov, but under a cap that's at 104 millions, the Florida Panthers back there, they've got a $1.5 million more to play with. So the GM could argue that when a player wants to really align with the percentage of the cap argument, he's not establishing fair comps. What he does is that he's reducing the financial competitiveness of his team against their rivals.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's a negotiation, right? That's what negotiations are. Because if you look at,
I'm just saying that because everybody takes that percentage of the cap. It's everywhere now. It's on those sites, but it's agent driven. So I'm just giving you like the more the executive side of it.
I get it, but I think it's a fair comparison. And yes, I don't think it will go totally that way. And I think there will need to be an adjustment to the fact that the cap is going up so drastically, and that they can't just start, comparing apples to apples in terms of percentage of the cap. Just to do the exercise, right? Like Quinn Hughes signed his contract coming out of entry level. Hudson is producing at a level very comparable to what Quinn Hughes did on his entry level. And so his entry level, his second contract was 7.85 times 6, right? Which has 2 years left on it after this one. So 7.85 at the time he signed it represented 9.6% of the cap. And so if Hudson's people came to Montreal and said, well, our guy deserves 9.6% of the cap, 9.6% of the cap in 2026 will represent a $10 million a year salary. Mm-hmm. So a shade over $10 million a year. So that's kind of what the Canadiens have to navigate, which is why I put $9 million for Hudson in my hypothetical little calculation earlier, because I think that's likely the floor. If he continues producing the way we've seen him produce over the life of his entry level contract, and if the Canadiens can get it under then great. If they can get it at 8, that would still make him. That would still bust the Suzuki ceiling on this team in terms of players coming out of entry level.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Canadiens are going to try and say you have to fall in line to what Slav and Caulfield did. That's a much harder argument to make to Lane Hudson just because of this financial context. It's hard to get. It would be difficult to get Hudson to agree unless Hudson himself just tells his agents, "Listen, we're doing this. I don't care. Like this, I want to be part of this team, and I want to do it in a way that allows us to compete." But if he tells his agents, "Go out and get me a fair contract," there's no agent worth his salt who would be like, "We're accepting this Nick Suzuki this artificial Nick Suzuki cap that you've placed on Caulfield and that you placed on Slavkovsky. Just because they accepted it doesn't mean we have to.
No, for sure. And right from this point on, it's a brand new world, So, yeah, and it's also, so we've been looking at it also from mainly from a free agent perspective. Also the money that's freed up to acquire top talent, but also on the trade front. If the Canadiens were to say, well, we could add a piece with a guy that's slightly older, but who's got a significant contract that's ongoing, goes back to the same argument of what I was saying about Slavkovsky and Guhle. It's because you can, not only do you know that player and you know what he's providing you, but now that player represents less of a burden on your cap. So if you go to a team that's probably heading to rebuild and who's willing to part with some of their veterans, adding those players and using some of those prospects and assets that you've got to acquire a player like that, you can integrate what's considered right now a high salary much more easily. And so I think that would be a way for the Canadiens to shift from a weak link team to a strong league team, because when you talk about everybody's going to benefit from a rising cap, even the Jake Evans of the world, but the devil's in the details also, and you've got some teams might, if they throw $1 million here, $1 million there, they might lose some of their flexibility if they spend it on role players. So I think that's where, if you aim for the right guy, not only in free agency but also on the trade market, you could be in a position where you could absorb a bigger contract and not be too bothered by that.
Well, I think the Mikko Marttinen trade is an example of the kinds of trades that are going to happen a little more now, in the sense that, he was a rental, but if you have a youngish player, let's say. Well, actually, let's take Hughes as an example. Like, let's say the Canucks go into a rebuild. Like, God knows what the hell the Canucks are going to do, right? So let's say they do go into a rebuild. His contract's up in 2 years. He wants to get paid commensurate to being a Norris Trophy winner and objectively one of the best defensemen in the NHL, and is looking for a number that is somewhere around the $15 to $16 million a year range, which doesn't make sense for the Canucks. That it's just the changing scale for the players is going to shake more players loose. You combine that with the fact that some teams are going to have internal caps that don't reach the cap ceiling. Pressure points are going to be created where more of these players will start to become available in trade than we've seen in the past. And they're going to become available in trade at various points in their contract that we also didn't see in the past. Like, a team could.
What do you mean?
In the sense that if a team clearly sees that they need to go into a 2 or 3 year rebuild and they have a player with 2 or 3 years left on his contract, and they know that they won't be able to sign that player once that contract expires, like, they could get proactive and look down the road and be like, okay, well, this guy's not going to be part of our rebuild. Let's get what we can for him now, as opposed to, and frankly, with all the different financial pressures being put on teams that are not spending to the cap, getting rid of these expensive players will allow certain teams to respect their internal budgets. And so it's going to be interesting to see. And so the Canadiens being lined up to have that cap space at that time, there should be, in theory, a number of avenues available to them to become the strong league team, as opposed to the weak link team they are now. Do we have to explain strong link and weak link every time we reference it, or do you think our listeners are aware of it?
I think they're good.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. Google it. But anyhow, but yeah, it's Canadiens are well positioned now. Are they? I didn't do this analysis for every single team in the league, but a lot of teams are going to be well positioned under this scenario, especially the big budget teams. So, this is going to rescue Toronto, frankly. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with Marner, but anyhow, there's a lot of teams that are going to be helped, but helped, but Montreal is definitely one of them. And again, the Carey Price contract expiring, combined with all the factors I mentioned earlier, I think the Canadiens are pretty well positioned to strike and be a vastly different team in 26-27 than they will be next season.
Doug, you've mentioned Carey Price a few times. I have a, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they found a way to move their last year of his deal. So
yeah, but I really don't sense the urgency to do it. I mean, because they would have to pay to do it, right?
Well, not necessarily, because it was not so long ago the idea of reaching the cap floor was a bit ludicrous because it was a lot easier than people would think, but now it's going to get harder to reach the floor, and it's going to be, or teams will be happy to. There's probably more teams that would find a use for a contract like that than in the past. So
the floor, the floor, by the way, I mean, I don't know how many people use the Stanley Cap as their salary cap tool. There's a site built by David Johnson, who used to work for the Maple Leafs in their kind of analytics department. But anyhow, so he's projected it out and used a pretty conservative inflator after 27, 28. But there's a world in which by 29-30, the salary floor will be higher than the salary cap is today.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind.
And Carey Price, I mean, basically, it's going to be all signing bonus. At the end, once his signing bonus is signed, then it doesn't represent, in hard dollars, it doesn't represent much. But the impact on the cap is significant. But it's only for the last year. Before that, he was not really tradable. So, but man, it's going to be exciting to see. It's fun, and it's you're right. I mean, when I said that there's the have and the have-nots, and that system has been put in place to avoid those things to happen, and it still will, because there's still going to be a focus on competitive balance and the likes. But I think that there's at some point the power, the means of the different owners will come into play, and I think that it should advantage the Canadiens a little bit more than some other teams. But then you've got also the Canadian dollar. That's a negative factor.
Big time. Big time. So and we have a CBA negotiation coming up, and in the league's release, the most important sentence perhaps in that release is, let me just pull it up here. Is the assumption that the CBA will extend, subject to the collective bargaining agreement being in effect beyond the 25-26 season. It's a pretty big qualifier. I know that the fact that the league and the PA feel comfortable putting out projections that go beyond next season is another sign, or the latest sign, that the CBA negotiations should not be contentious, and that they already know that they're going to have a lot of common ground. And Gary Bettman coming out repeatedly and talking about how working with Marty Walsh, he really feels like it's a partnership, and they really feel good about the potential of avoiding a work stoppage and all that stuff. But if there are some owners, and I'm thinking of places like Calgary, like Winnipeg, Ottawa, who are looking at their revenue streams coming in Canadian dollars and having to pay these numbers and reach this floor and pay that cap in US dollars, with the Canadian dollar continuously tanking compared to the US dollar. I wonder if Gary Bettman will start to get some pressure from that pocket of owners that, hey, this is not what we signed up for. Like this cap going up this fast is not in line with our revenues going up in lockstep. These are based on league-wide revenues. Individual team revenues are obviously different. So let's see if this becomes a factor, and they need to negotiate some sort of adjustment to how they dole out revenue or how they calculate the cap or whatever. But who knows? Let's hope.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. But it could.
All right. Well, next thing is going to be a 25% tariff on the contract, the next contract
Yeah, that's
of Kirby Dach.
Yes.
All right.
So
All right.
Future Friday time. Let's do Future Friday.
Future Friday.
All right. So it is my understanding, Marc-Antoine, that you had a conversation with someone this morning. Someone who began the season in Montreal.
Yeah. Have conversations with many
Montreal. You had many,
Yeah.
good for you. You had conversations with many people. I did not. I was sleeping. But yeah, you spoke to Oliver Kapanen this morning, who is playing in Timrå, is doing quite well. For Olli Jokinen over in the Swedish Hockey League, his first year in the Swedish Hockey League. So why don't you tell me too. I don't really know how that conversation went. What's going on with Oliver Kapanen?
Well, first of all, I mean, he is very happy with the way things are going on a personal level. To him, I would say it's a bit of the best of both worlds, because on the one hand, he had put himself as a goal, as a target to crack the Canadiens lineup, and he did. Mm-hmm. But then somewhere in his heart, he thought that it would probably be better for his development to spend one more year in Europe. So on the one hand, he's got the gratification of things working out and achieving his preseason goal with the Canadiens, and then going back to Europe, joining Timrå in the Swedish league, and becoming an impact player for them, first line center. So over there, things have gone. Look, he didn't have any points in the last couple of games at the time of this recording, but before that, he's been consistently almost a point per game player. And there's not that many guys in the SHL that are point per game players. It's as everybody knows, it's a tough league. It's a very defensive league. So in order to be able to maintain that level of at least statistical consistency is quite impressive. Kapanen doesn't want to get distracted by that too much. He says, yeah, points are nice, but I don't want to be too, lose myself into this. He said that regarding his time in Montreal, he kept out of that and tried to bring back with him this idea that he really needs to improve his board battles, his stick battles, the use of his body, just more like the physical play. Overall, with the bigger ice surface over there are less situations where he can really apply those ideas, and because the style of hockey is just different. But in the back of his mind, it's really this notion of winning pucks back, and this has been really a big motivation for him. And that's where you mentioned Olli Jokinen, obviously, longtime NHL veteran. So Jokinen will give him tips either during practice or during games, some of them that are related to board battles and winning pucks back. So that's good. He's been happy with his role, happy with his minutes. So he's playing quite a bit. Plays on both special teams. On the power play, he's been playing the bumper. And he says that he likes to play close to the net. He said that's where I feel comfortable. I would see myself being the sort of guy who could score some dirty goals from that spot. He said when a good bumper guy will read the game well and will be able to go and support his teammates to facilitate passes, whether it's rims or coming from the half wall, but just be the guy that will create space and create some breathing room for the other guys on the unit. And he said, honestly, that role that I've been given as a first line center is not really a surprise. And I was surprised that he said that, but he said, I finished the year in Finland strongly last year.
Yeah.
And based
and the World
on
Championships.
That's it. Great World Championships. And with the momentum that he gained in Montreal, for him, he thought of arriving in Sweden and knowing that he was ready for, a big workload and ready to be like a go-to player, even though he's barely 21. So it's exciting. You can tell that he's really in a good place mentally, and he's in a good spot on the score sheet too. So that's good.
Well, yeah. I mean, prior to the last two games where, not only he was kept off the score sheet, his team was kept. They've been shut out in 2 straight games. But
they've
lost
5 in a row. So
yes,
they're not.
They've lost 5 in a row. They've been shut out 2 in a row. But prior to those 2 games, he had 2, 4, 6, a 7-game point streak, and had 5 goals in those 7 games. And so, no, very productive. I mean, the thing I wonder with him and Beck, both right shot, presumably bottom 6 centermen. Will one of them have to move to the wing? And of the 2, I wonder that most about Kapanen. Yeah. Or can one of them be more than we're assuming that they are? And Kapanen's production, obviously in a different league, different scale, but as a young player in a very competitive league, can one of them emerge to be more than just the quote unquote 2-way center, and maybe elevate into a second line winger or something like that? So, because I have trouble seeing. They both seem like guys that have a ceiling that's higher than fourth line, but maybe not as high as second line. And they can't both play third line center. So I'm just curious to see how that's going to develop with the 2 of them. They seem to be competing for the same spot.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think Kapanen could more easily be turned into a winger. I feel like Beck is purely a pure center.
Yeah.
Whereas Kapanen, he would offer you that flexibility, maybe to play on the wing a little bit higher in the lineup. Maybe maybe that the vision is not the greatest. So I don't know. It also depends. Next year at training camp, there'll be so many bodies, and there'll be so much competition. I think we would make a mistake to pencil either of those 2 guys in the Canadiens lineup next year. They could both crack the lineup. One of the 2 could, but maybe none will. So we'll have to wait and see. He says, I know that, let's say, for example, in the offensive zone, I need to be a lot more direct in my attacks, and I need to learn to go on the inside, have a faster release with my shot. And this is really something that he tries to apply in his game over there, but that he knows that he's going to need to improve in North America to be productive. But you mentioned the steady production. It's he said, I feel as though I've got a chance to score every game. If not, I'll manufacture a scoring chance. But he says, you got to understand that Swedish league is so defensive. The scoring chances don't come at the rate that they do in the NHL. So when one scoring chance presents itself, you got to be ready to take it. So it's that level of awareness that when it's ready to pounce, you better capitalize. We hear that cliche after NHL games sometimes. We didn't capitalize on our chances. Well, you learn to do that in a league like the SHL, because they don't come often. So the good players, they jump on them when it happens.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how he finishes the season. I mean, honestly, it's really impressive to look at his game log. it's there's not that many dips that are evident here. So it's interesting. It's one of the only games where he didn't get a point. Is a game his team won 5-1, but still, ice time is encouraging. Shot totals are encouraging, and obviously the goals and assists are encouraging too. So,
I want to finish with a little story about Timrå, because
okay, sure,
Oliver Kapanen is not the only player. He's not the only. I will say it's not the only person in that organization that was drafted by the Montreal Canadiens.
Ah,
no. So you look in the lineup. You say, "Well, I don't see anybody else." Well, the thing is, back in 2010, Trevor Timmins drafted a guy named Jon Westin in the 7th round. The guy didn't amount to much. I mean, he retired something like 5-6 years ago. Mm-hmm. He's 32 years old now. Okay, and he retired playing for Timrå after the 2017-2018 season. And Jon Westin is still with the club. He's their equipment manager. So this guy, who was a Montreal Canadiens draft pick in 2010, is now the guy who sharpens Oliver Kapanen's skate and does his laundry.
That is hilarious. Yeah, I'm pulling up his page right here. That is funny.
So it's quite the weird career arc, So he says, I met him in the summer. I didn't know back then. And he says, when I came back, he told me in the summer, he says, I was drafted by Montreal. He said, really? What? So he said, yeah, that's quite funny. So Jon Westin, or Jon Westin, said he's a great guy. He said he's a great guy, but it's similar. It's as if back in the day, André Boudria would have drafted Jerv.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
it's the equivalent. It's
hilarious.
It's a bit out
that's
there.
So funny. And really, he had 4 points in 6 games at the U18 World Championships that year. That's had a pretty good draft year. I'm just looking at his draft year right now, 2009-10. 26 points in 31 games in the junior league in Sweden for Modo. 4 points in 6 games at the U18 Worlds. Pretty good draft year. For a 7th round pick, I mean, why not?
Yeah, you take a flyer on a guy like that, and who knows,
He's only 5'11", but still. I've never heard of a former player becoming an equipment manager. That is a first. That is honestly, I have never heard that before. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my my little nugget to finish the show.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's a good nugget, I gotta say. Mm-hmm. But let's see if he can prepare or at least sharpen the skates well enough for Oliver Kapanen to continue producing the way he has for Timrå. So interesting prospect and a more interesting equipment manager, as it turns out.
All right.
That's great.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up for today. So thank you, everybody, for listening. So we'll be back.
Hey, before we go, just want to shout out. So a very active member of our chat and our community, Alex LaChapelle. Recently had his first baby. So very congratulations to Alex and your young family. He noted in the chat that the baby has a signed jersey from Martin St. Louis.
No, that's the previous baby. He said that's.
Oh, that was the previous. Well, baby has not yet left the hospital. She already has a signed jersey by the coach. Oh, already that was the last baby post. All right, back to it. Oh no, he's saying that's his final baby post.
Oh,
but that's
okay.
Yeah, that's when he said last. He meant final. Yeah. It's his first baby. So anyhow, congratulations, Alex. We appreciate your participation in the community, in the chat.
He's been doing the game threads.
For those of you, he creates the game thread every game. For those of you who are not subscribers to paid subscribers, you're missing out in the chat, honestly. So it's a great little place to banter during games, after games, between games. That's where we get our mailbag questions. But it's really, if you're looking for a good place where to chat with other fans, there's always a great conversation going on in there. So if you're not a subscriber and you want in on that, you can go to BasuandGodin.com and become a paid subscriber, and then you can access the chat and take part and get wonderful news like Alex sharing the birth of his new baby and getting a signed jersey from Martin St. Louis before even leaving the hospital. So
that's
congrats, Alex, and hope everything's going well, and hope you're getting some sleep every now and then.
Yeah. So for those paid subscribers, we'll be back on Monday with our episode with our Monday mailbag. So otherwise, if you tune in for the full episodes on YouTube or whatnot, well, we'll be back next Friday for those people. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy, everybody. Take care and have a great weekend.
Basu Godin